Just recently I finished this mural, which I'm really proud of. It was at a preschool nearby. And I'm making this video for anyone that is looking to do a similar project, whether you're painting a bedroom wall, painting something for a friend at home. Could be big, could be small, but this is for anyone looking for some advice and tips on how to go about something like this. So I basically got this job through a friend, conveniently. My partner's best friend worked at this preschool. And so, yeah, I went there, I met them. I was shown this wall, or this fence, which is a pretty cool thing to be able to paint, but it's a very difficult challenge because you can see it's sort of this inside paneling on the fence. So it was about 0.6 meters high, so about this high, and about 16 meters wide, so really wide. So the ratio was something really difficult to work with, because what we were talking about at first was that there's a beach nearby. They wanted a natural scene, New Zealand animals, New Zealand birds. So there's a heavy focus on that. But if I was going to make this whole section of fence a landscape, you'd have to stretch it out so thin and so wide that it just looks unrealistic, and it's not even possible. And so because it was so wide, because it was such a challenge to paint, I basically started with, I'm just going to cut it in half. I'm just going to do two main parts. I could have done 3 or 4. But yeah, just to not get overwhelmed with the length of the mural, I thought I'm going to focus on this half, and I'm going to do this half, and hopefully they go together. So yeah, I started sketching ideas. The things I had to work with was the local beach, New Zealand birds, and within the preschool they have 2 age groups. So they have the little blue penguins, and that's a Hora whale, otherwise known as the southern right whale. So I cut it in half with some flowy lines. I use these flowy, colourful lines in a lot of my artwork. It's just kind of become a signature thing of mine that I really like. So that one in the middle, because that made sense, and that kind of ties things together really well. And the young group they have at the preschool, the little blue penguins, I thought they'd look great in the center. Penguins look awesome just as a creature, but I think it is quite symbolic having like the youngest group smack bang in the middle. And then we had the Hora whale to the right, to the left rather. So that was cool. And then basically from that idea alone stemmed, to the left is like an ocean scene, and to the right is like a beach scene, which is what they wanted because there's the local beach nearby. So that's how we got to that. And then you fill in all the rest, draw some fish, draw a crayfish, draw some trees and pukeko, and you've got a finished piece. And I was pretty happy with this, but I did it in a few hours, thinking I would send it to them, I'd get some feedback, they'd say what they want changed. They may want different animals, they may tweaks. But I sent it through to them and they were really happy with it. There were no changes suggested at all, which is kind of a first for me, or it doesn't happen very often. So yeah, that was great. So how I went about getting reference material for this was basically Google Images. Google was my friend, and it is yours too. But I wasn't copying anything or stealing any artwork or any photography or anything like that. So I just took, I knew a bunch of the animals that I wanted to paint and the things I wanted to paint. And I took reference images from Google, and I actually edited, removed the backgrounds in Procreate and just printed them out on a sheet like this. And this was really good. This is just in like a clear document envelope. This was good because it's a bit waterproof, a bit paint proof, so it can last a few days while painting. And yeah, that's all my references, and that's all I had. Now for the beach scene, the right side of the mural, I went down to Browns Bay Beach, which is the local beach there. I took a bunch of photos, and I'll put this on the screen, but basically the reference I had was a bunch of photos I took mashed together to kind of make one very long beach scene, which is a bit unrealistic, but it works well on the mural. And I kind of simplified that, and then in my other sheet I took 3 of those images where I just really like the colors, because the colors are hard to match without looking at a reference. You don't have to match them perfectly, but they need to look natural and somewhat realistic. So literally, I might put this on screen for you, but basically taking this photo I took as an example, I'd go through and I'd get out the main colors, and then I went to buy those paints. So basically here we've got my sky colors. I literally sample this color down here, the very lightest part of the sky, which is towards the horizon, and that's my color. And then somewhere in the middle I sample that and put a dot there, and then darkest part of the sky, which is always higher up in the atmosphere, we took that. So we've got 3 sky colors. Literally I went to the paint shop, look at the sample colors on the little cards they've got, and get them as close to that as you can. And then I've got my 3 sky colors, so when I come to paint this section of the wall, I've got those colours, I can blend them together easy enough. And for anything like this with a contrast or with a gradient, you don't need more than 2 or 3 colours. I wouldn't go get 7 colours or something like that. That's going to be too much work. You can get away with 2 most of the time, but 3's a good bet. And so same for the sand. You can see there's light sand, there's dark sand, there's a medium tone sand. That's what I got there, and I just sampled them from the photo. Same for the water. You've got lighter parts and darker parts. Same for the grass. And grass is always a tricky one to paint because depending on your photo and depending what time of day it is, it can look very yellow or it could look very green. Grass is such a tricky one, so I really suggest matching that. The kind of sky and water you can get away with, because there's a bit of, the water's a little bit green, sky's blue, but yeah, grass is a tricky one. So you can see my light green here is actually very yellow, and then we've got a very green, very green, and then we've got a dark green that's actually very dark and got some brown in it, which is often the case with at least New Zealand landscapes, but probably global. So hopefully that gives you a bit of understanding on how I got my colours and how I got my paint colours ready to paint the mural. I literally used photos, took samples from those photos, got all the main colours I need, and anything extra I can mix together. I've got black, I've got white, so I can darken and lighten them if I need to, but these will cover most of the canvas, so that's all you need. Speaking of paint, actually, I should mention what paints I got, because I did a van painting video a while back, and the one question I got so many times, because I forgot to mention it, is what paint did I use? So I got these sample test spots from my local paint shops. I'm in New Zealand, so we have Dulux is a pretty popular brand here, and these are just like 250ml, I think. Yeah, 250ml test pots. These cost me like $5 or $6, which is why I got these. And this is a granite for the sized canvas I had. This is great. You can even get away with these, which are probably a third of the size. These are a little bit cheaper from Resine, but these, for anyone not in Australia or New Zealand, these are just acrylic house paints. You could go online and look at product descriptions for those, but yeah, just acrylic house paints will be totally fine as long as the surface is like clean and maybe lightly sanded and undercoated. Then you can put these on, and then over the top you just want to do a protective clear coat. But as long as you use like a decent quality brand of paint, you should be fine. There's not much more to it than that, honestly. Alright, so now we're coming to the actual painting part, the painting of the mural, the part you've been waiting for, and I'm going to break that down now for you. So first things first, I didn't start with everything all at once. The mural's big enough as it was. I started with just the right section, the beach landscape scene. We started there, and so I drew it out. A pencil's fine. You can also use chalk is quite good because chalk rubs off. Sometimes with pencil you might paint over it, particularly with a white paint, and then it just becomes a smudgy, dirty color with the pencil. So chalk was always great, but pencil is fine. Just use like an HB or something lower. Don't use like a 6B. So we drew it out. I wanted to make sure in particular with this one that the corner looked really nice, because there's kind of this point you'll see where there's a 90-degree angle in the corner, and it's actually quite difficult to make something that's a consistent, that should just be a flat plane, to look consistent across that corner. So I spent a few times redrawing that section, and it was as simple as like the line, for example, the horizon line that goes straight across, and when it meets that corner, when you're looking at it from a distance, it doesn't look like a straight line, it's like this. So sometimes you actually need to like curve the line downwards on both sides. So in reality, what you've got across is like this, but when it sits in that corner, it actually makes it look straight across, if you get what I'm saying. It's a bit difficult to explain, but basically I spent a bit of time standing back from the mural, looking at that corner, redrawing it so that when you stood back, it looked like one consistent line and like it was actually flowing across, which is really effective. And I really encourage like spending the time to just make sure that looks right to you. So we did that. We'd drawn our landscape. The next thing we started doing was blocking in colors. I highly suggest this because it helps you visualize it a lot better. Some of the colors need 2 coats too, like darker colors, like the dark blue for the sky, the ocean, the greenery. If you just did it with one color, it doesn't cover the white background enough, so you need 2 colors. So your best to just block it all in. So that means sky just gets the medium tone blue, the water just gets your middle blue tone, the grass just gets one green tone, just one block of color. That's what I mean by blocking in. So now that you've got that done, you can actually start coming up in with detail and getting it to where you want it to be. So I always start background to foreground, meaning I'm painting the furthest thing away, because anything else I'm painting will probably cover it to some degree. For example, you paint the sky before you paint the trees, because the tree sits on top of the sky in terms of the painting. So yeah, we started with the sky. It's kind of easy to do. It's a big block of color too. So when you've got that semi done, you feel accomplished. You feel like you've done half the painting, even though you haven't really. So we had our 3 colors. Coming back to my reference image, over here. So I'd start with going across. I might do like 1/2 meter section with a reasonably big brush. You could go bigger, always go as big as you can. My good friend Phil, who I used to do house painting with, actually always said use the biggest brush you possibly can for the job. It doesn't mean using literally the biggest brush there is, but use the biggest brush you can for the job within reason, because it saves you so much time. It's unbelievable. So I had this size brush. I could have gone bigger, to be honest, but I had this size brush. So I was doing about 1/2 meter of what is only a portion of the sky, so probably a band about that wide and about that long with the white. And then I had another little pot of the other blue I had with a different brush, and I'd paint that above it, and then I try blend them together with the first brush or a clean brush. This part's tricky because you're trying to paint a lot of color, do a big section, and blend them together before the paint dries, which is unbelievably tricky. So the trick really is speed. Think about what you're doing before you go ahead and do it. 2 people is great. I actually got my partner to help me on another section where I was just putting in a big block of color with a gradient, because you just want to blend that color before it dries. If it starts to dry, it goes bad. If it starts to dry, just stop and start again when it's dried, because you need to blend that color when it's wet. So with the sky done, that meant we could go ahead, and I was painting the land. So I had Mount Rangitoto in the background, and then we had the ocean. So that was already drawn in. I'd sort of painted just over my lines. That meant when I painted the volcano, I was painting over the blue, so there was nothing in between. You know, the colors met perfectly. So we used a very similar process for the water, the sand, and the grass. Kind of those 2 or 3 base colors, blending them if we need to. For example, the sand and the grass, you don't need to blend smoothly like you do the sky, because you can kind of loosely mix it. I guess you're kind of blending it as well, but it can be a bit looser, and you can have a bit more texture in there. The sky, if it's textured, looks bad. The sand and grass, if they look textured, look good. So there's a bit of skill in there. So I definitely suggest practicing before doing it on the wall. Yeah, there's a little bit of practice involved to get those looking the way you want. But the same basic process of choosing your 2 or 3 base colors, putting them on the wall, putting them where they should go, and then getting some details from there is how to go about it. So I actually struggled a little bit with perspective, because what I had done in Procreate on the iPad and what was on the wall was a bit different. The scale is different. And so I managed to get the trees kind of in a spot I was happy with. Actually on this particular day, I hadn't planned to paint the pukekos, but I was kind of ahead of schedule. So on my actual reference here, I actually drew a bit of a pukeko just down there, just in black, just to kind of get it, like if I did it too far back and it's too big, you've got a giant pukeko, you've got like a dinosaur, and if you did it too far forward, you've got like a little mouse. So the scale can look really bad if it's wrong. So you might just want to sketch it on something else. Just sketch it and make sure it's kind of okay before you put it on the wall, is my advice there. But yeah, with the trees and the greenery and everything, got those roughly where I wanted, and it's just a slower journey than painting in the sky. I was using smaller brushes. I was mostly using these 2. So yeah, they're kind of medium brushes in the grand scheme of things. And for some small details, I was using a brush this small. That's my smallest brush I used, and not too often, more for like the animals and details. I used a bit of that. But for most of the landscape, I was using, yeah, these kind of brushes, and they're really good. I don't suggest painting every blade of grass, but as you get closer to the foreground, you do want to start doing a little bit of that, having some little vertical strokes and making it look like grass, and just slightly different shades of green, like layered over the top of each other, just gives a bit of texture and makes it look like grass. So that right side of the mural actually took a while. I would say it's the part of the mural that I spent the most on, because there was quite a lot of detail in the trees, and the background, the cliffs and all the bushes there, and even the foreground, the grasses. Probably spent a bit too long on it, but yeah, I ended up erasing 2 trees, because after I painted the first big tree, which I was really happy with, I spent a couple hours on it, I thought this is going to take me too long, so I erased the other couple of trees. because they were actually different types of trees, which was close to my reference material. Like, it was much closer to what I had in these photos, but I thought that's not so important. I need to not spend too much time and just have this look good. So yeah, I erased what I was starting to do on the other trees and just did 3 similar looking trees, which turned out great. And then the sort of cream on top, the cherry on top rather, is the pukeko. When you start putting animals into it, life into it, it looks really good. So my reference was this pukeko guy. So just using the reference, I painted that in. Kind of a similar process too with the other things in the landscape we talked about. Like for the blues on the pukeko, I kind of had 2 blues and I painted them in roughly and then went over the top and kind of blended them, added some texture with little brush flicks. It's kind of the same process for a lot of things, surprisingly. That's basically the landscape done. There's a couple little details like where the water meets the sand, which is effectively just like nice white wavy lines. There's a bit of a technique to that. I suggest practicing that before you go ahead. But really the trick is just these thin white wavy lines, or specifically not white. You might actually want to get your lightest blue because the contrast of the white is too high. But get your lightest blue and just do some wavy lines. Have a look at ocean and where it hits the sand, and look at your reference material and you'll get what I mean, and just try and mimic it as best as you can and simplify it and copy it, and yeah, just practice. Practice makes perfect. So now we come to the left side of the mural. This was basically a whole new mural in my mind because I'd spent a couple of days on this right side. It was a lot of work, a lot of focus. That was done. I felt like I'd finished, but we have the other left side to do. So yeah, again, we started with the basics. This one was easier in a way, but harder too. I had to get my partner to help me put down the base blue, which had a really nice gradient to it, because there was just so much paint put down so fast, and to blend it without it drying on me just helped having a second pair of hands there. So my partner helped, which I'm grateful for. That only takes a couple hours, but again, 2 coats. 2 coats was important. So we put down the base 3 blues that I had, and yeah, let that dry, and then we went over the top blending it, and yeah, it was good. I almost ran out of paint, so it was a bit clutch at the end there, but we got there. And then to kind of tie it all together, which was really nice, I put in the colors I had in the middle of the painting, which I got asked about this, and the reason for the colors in those middle strips, those flowy lines, is the sort of yellow and orange was supposed to be kind of like a sunset color, which is sort of in the landscape, at least on the left side of the landscape. And then on the left side, those other 2 flowy color lines were just different blues from the ocean. So it was kind of like the ocean meeting the other part of the mural, and kind of like a gradual shift between them, if that makes sense. And also they were just nice colors, and they looked pleasant. And for the next part, and I think this will be really useful to you, I didn't just go ahead and use my amazing artistic ability to draw everything onto the wall and nail it first try. I actually drew pretty much every creature I was going to put on the mural at home first on my desk. I had the size of the mural. I basically measured that out on my desk. Spent a few hours drawing the outline for each creature based on my references again, just these kind of references I had. So yeah, I drew those all up and cut those all out, and I actually took them with me on the day, stuck it to the wall, and sort of got it where I wanted, which is much easier. You don't have to do this, but really it's a time-saving thing. To actually sit there, and this penguin, for example, to sit there, draw the penguin, figure it out, erase a bit, draw the penguin, be kind of happy with it, and then be like, I wish it was 10 centimeters to the left, redraw it, I wish it was a bit bigger. You spend a lot of time drawing. If I were to draw it all on the wall from the get-go, I would have spent a full day probably in extra time. So yeah, did it all at home, took it there, stuck it on the wall, and literally just drew around the cutout I had on the wall to get it there. And so yeah, that was a big time-saving tip, really helpful. Yeah, I was really happy with how the penguins turned out. I think they look great. It kind of became the feature piece for the whole wall, which I knew it was going to happen. I knew having like a central cute little couple of animals would look really good, and I'm glad they turned out well. I spent about half a day on them, bearing in mind I didn't really have to draw them because I just had my stencil cut out, drew around it. So yeah, it took me about 4 or 5 hours to paint those, and then I did the following whale for the second part of the day. So it took me a full day to paint a whale and 3 penguins. Make of that what you will. So moving on to the whale, I think this is a very good example for a couple of things I want to talk about, and that is particularly if you're painting something in the ocean, but even something in the distance, you don't want to paint with the colors that it is necessarily. And what I mean by that is I actually didn't have any extra colors to paint the whale with. I used only the colors I used to paint the ocean with. So the lightest color on the whale, the highlights at the top, and like the little patches of its belly and that kind of thing, they were the light blue from the background. And then the darkest parts of the whale were the dark blue from the bottom of the ocean in that gradient. And I just used those colors. There was no extra colors I brought in. You can use exactly the colors of the ocean for that, particularly because the whale is kind of blue, grey/blue anyway. If it's an orange fish, it's a bit different. But yeah, it's really important to incorporate your background to make it look like it's kind of sitting in the water. And that's how you do it. You just use the same colors. Yeah, and that's the trick. I will say the same is true for anything in the distance. Like I should have talked about it more for the right part of the mural, but the Mount Rangitoto, which is in the distance, that has a bit of blue in it. Like if you're up close, it's kind of green. It's covered in bush, green and brown, right? But in the distance, a few kilometers away, because it's so far in the distance, the like hazy blue of the sky, it gets in there. So when you're painting it, you basically want to paint a bit of blue in it. And the further things are away, the more blue, the more sky color you want in it, basically. And that helps give it the perspective. I thought that was important to note. I didn't use any whale colors per se. I had no extra colors. I just used the same colors I did for the ocean and the whale. Moving on to the fish, I used this element a little bit. I had 3 fish, and the one on the left, I tried to make it so that it was painted a bit further away, and that just meant there was more blue in it. There was less orange. It was a little bit, it just looked like it sat back in the distance a little bit. I didn't do it perfectly, but that was kind of the idea there. And for all of these, I was using the base watercolors, and then for the snapper, these are 3 snapper, and yeah, I obviously brought in the orange because that's the color of the fish, but I wasn't trying to overpower it. And you don't want it to be like opaque, strong orange. You want it to kind of like blend into a blue for the belly, which is kind of a gray, but in the water, it's more of a blue, if you get what I mean. So for the 3 kawai, they were basically the same thing. They had a bit more gray on them, naturally. I'll get my reference image. Here we go. So that's my reference I was using. It looks a bit different to what I painted, but this is just my reference. So most of it is grey or silver, but underwater that's more of a blue. So that's what I went with. I didn't actually use much grey when I was painting it. I was basically using the lighter blue from the top of the ocean gradient to get this colour, which makes it blend in really well. And then we did add a bit of orange, a bit of red, bit of orange and yellow for the top of the kawai there. So next was the crayfish. I found this really challenging, to be honest. I hadn't painted something like this before, and just sort of the form of it and the rock. The rock was one that intimidated me a little bit, believe it or not. Out of all things I painted on this mural, the rock was kind of intimidating because you'd think it would be easy. You think painting a rock is easy, but something as simple as an underwater rock is actually hard to make it look like a rock. But anyway, I got there. I probably spent like 2 hours just painting like this kind of base, which is again similar to the whale, really just like the lighter colors of the ocean and a little bit of like roughly painting it to give it a bit of texture. But that was it. It was pretty simple, but it took me a while to get there. I think because I was intimidated, and that's a good lesson too. Like, don't go in thinking this is going to be hard, because it will be hard. So anyway, we came to the crayfish. It was challenging, but it was really fun to get in. Again, I had my kind of cutout stencil, put that on, was happy with the position, drew around that, and yeah, painted it in. I added a lot of blue in. There was obviously orange in the crayfish, but if you look at it up close, there's a lot of like light blue for the highlights, dark blue for the darker areas. So a lot of the crayfish is actually blue, even though it looks very orange and red. So the final animals in this mural, and the final thing I painted were 2 dolphins, and I made them look like they're in the distance a little bit, and I kind of added a lot of water in, similar to the whale to a degree, added a lot of water into my paint. So I was just doing like thin washes. I wasn't going in with like dark blue and very light blue. I was going in thin washes to build it up. But again, just using the colors of the ocean to build up those colors. I didn't actually use gray paint, even though the dolphins are kind of gray and they look gray in the painting. I just used the blues from the ocean to get those colors. So that, I think, brings us to the end of my explanation, my discussion here. I hope you've taken something from this. There's undoubtedly something I've missed, and something I meant to tell you but I forgot to. So if you have any questions, please let me know below. I will reply to you. If there's anything big, I will make a follow-up video, and I hope to keep pushing out more videos and explaining more and more things, so I hope you can follow along with those. Please subscribe. I'd appreciate you sticking around, and I think you'll get a lot of value from it. But yeah, here's the final mural. Really happy with how this turned out. Took me about 8 days total, maybe 9 total, and then I put a clear coat over the top. I will add what paint I used for that, because I know people will ask. I used Resine Uracryl Graffiti Shield. I'll put a link or something down below. You may not have Resine paint in your country, but it's just a protective clear coat. It's a 2-pot mix. There's lots of different products for this kind of thing. You could just go into your paint shop and ask, but yep, that's what I used. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks very much.